On February 21st of 1997, a man claiming to be named Mel Waters was a guest on Coast to Coast radio show with the now famous host, Art Bell. But this man was no ordinary guest, and little did we know at the time that the story he would tell would lead so many down one of the biggest rabbit holes in urban lore. Mel Waters lived in Ellenburg, Washington, and had made the claim that on his land there was a strange hole. The hole was 9 foot 9 inches across and had a stone or brick lining that went down about 15 feet into the ground. What made this hole so strange was that although plants seemed to flourish around the hole, animals went out of their way to avoid it. Even birds refused to fly over it. Now, this hole had been there as long as anyone could remember, and people in the area not only knew about the hole, but they also threw their trash down into the hole. But the hole never seemed to fill up. As a matter of fact, no one had a clue just how deep the hole was. Intrigued by this idea, and being an avid fisherman, Mel Waters decided that he would try to figure out just how deep the hole was by lowering weighted fishing line down into the hole. Spool after spool, Mel lowered line after line down into the hole until he reached somewhere around 80,000 feet of line that had been tied end to end. That's over 15 miles of line. But still, he never reached the bottom. Later, Mel asked one of his neighbors about the hole and about how strange animals were acting around the hole. The neighbor told Mel a story about how he had disposed of his dog's body by tossing it into the hole, and how sometime later he saw his dog walking down the road, alive. The neighbor said he tried to call the dog, but it seemed to ignore his previous master and just walked off, never to be seen again. Mel Waters even discussed issues with radios becoming staticky when near the hole. That is, except for one time when Mel was able to pick up a radio broadcast of a baseball game. The only issue is that the game was from 1967, and this was 1997, 30 years later. Mel had also stated that one of his neighbors relayed a story of seeing a beam of black light coming out of the hole at one point. According to the neighbor, the beam of light shot up into the sky like a pillar of black light. There was also some talk of there once being stone columns around the hole, similar to the idea of Stonehenge, however, without the stones on top known as lintels. After Mel Waters' initial appearance on Coast to Coast, he returned to give Art Bell and the audience an update. According to Mel Waters, he had been in Ellensburg to make the call to Coast, and then the following day returned home to find that he was unable to return to his own property. According to Mel, there was a substantial government presence there, and they claimed that Mel couldn't enter the property due to a plane crash that had taken place. However, when Mel pushed the issue, he was confronted by a plainclothes government agent who told Mel that he didn't necessarily own the property anymore, and that if he didn't leave the area, there would be problems for not only himself, but his family. Again, according to Mel Waters, he was offered a great deal of money to simply keep his mouth shut and leave the country for the rest of his life. So Mel took the offer and moved to Australia. But after 2 years, Mel missed his family and decided to make a trip back to see them. This was a mistake. According to Mel Waters himself, he was on a bus to go see his nephew when trouble broke out and the police were called. Everyone is put on a different bus, and at some point, Mel blacks out. 12 days later, Mel wakes up in San Francisco in an alleyway. His arm is sore, and when he looks, there are needle holes and bruises. His keys and wallet are gone, and his back teeth are missing. Mel never makes it to the property where the hole was claimed to be at, and legal action was taken against Mel Waters, suing him. Claims were made that he had illegally built infrastructure on the land. A few days after relaying this to Art Bell on Coast to Coast, Mel claimed that his bank account had been emptied. To add to the mystery, Art Bell discussed that a TV crew had been in the area where Mel Waters claimed the hole existed. And while they never found the hole, they did witness a heavy military presence in the area. Not only this, but the mapping program, once known as Terra Server, had the entire area completely whited out, hiding the geographic features of the area. But hold on, the story doesn't end there. According to Mel Waters, a Native American tribe in Nevada reached out to him and asked him if he wanted to come to Nevada to investigate yet another bottomless hole. The second hole wasn't on the land controlled by the Native American tribe, but rather on public land that was being used by the Basques. The Basques are a cultural group from Europe in an area between France and Spain. Since the early 1800s, the Basques had been occupying this land in Nevada to herd sheep. And according to the Basques, the hole had always been there, well over 200 years. This hole was also just over 9 feet wide, but rather than having a stone ring around it, the hole had a metal ring and a metal lining down as far as anyone could tell. Unlike the previous hole, this one was emitting heat, and the metal collar around it was warm to the touch. At some point, Mel had accidentally dropped a tool on the metal collar, and rather than making a loud clang that one thought it would make, there was complete silence. The first test that Mel Waters and the Basques made in relation to the hole was one of lowering a bucket of ice down into the hole while keeping another bucket to the side as a control. When the surface ice had finally melted, they retrieved the bucket of ice that had been lowered down into the hole. It hadn't melted at all. Not only did the ice not melt, it was no longer cold and wet, and no longer felt like ice, but more like large pieces of salt. They then tried to melt the ice over an open flame, but rather than melting, it caught fire. Not only did it burn then, but it continued to burn for months. According to Mel, after this, one of the Basques volunteered to go down into the hole, but wiser minds prevailed, and rather than sending a human down into the hole, they chose to send one of the sheep. Just like Mel had witnessed at the first hole, where animals didn't want to be near the hole, the sheep resisted, trying to kick its way out of the crate. They then lowered the sheep into the hole to approximately 1,000 feet. Soon there was a humming sensation, and after about 30 minutes, they brought the sheep back up. Although the sheep looked fine, it was in fact dead. After this, Mel and the Basques decided to do a simple necropsy of the sheep, where they discovered the sheep appeared to have been cooked from the inside out. Stranger yet was what Mel described as a large tumor taking up the entire cavity of the sheep's insides. Then the tumor began to move. Mel and the Basques cut the tumor open to find what Mel described as an entity looking like a fetal seal, but with very human eyes. Mel claimed that the fetal seal seemed to want to get back to the hole, so he picked it up and set it at the edge of the hole. Mel stated that the seal had an odor like that of ozone. The seal-like creature examined the men for around 2 hours and then turned and jumped into the hole it had come from. Now remember the ice that transmutated into something different? Something no longer ice? Well, one of the Basques had taken the ice and used it to heat his cabin by placing it in a stove. The problem is that the ice seemed to suck up all the moisture around it. The man claimed that the cabin was always dry and that the man was always thirsty. If he boiled water, the steam would curl back down and be absorbed by the ice rather than dissipating into the air like normal. Not only that, but the ice seemed to be becoming more dense and much heavier. As a matter of fact, One day, the stove, filled with the ice, crashed down through the floor of the cabin. Since it was still warm, the man just patched over the floor and continued to use it for heat. However, one day the man returned to his cabin, but it was gone and had been turned to dust. After a few months of living with his brother, the man went back to check the area where the cabin had been and found that the stove was now sunk down 5 feet into the ground, and that the hole where the stove was perfectly round and smooth. The stove had become so heavy that it took a powerful crane to remove the stove from the hole. The Basques also claimed that they were being visited by the fetal seal, and that it spoke to them. Not only this, but there now appeared to be brightly colored birds flying around the hole, birds that were bulletproof. Mel Waters claimed that there were audio recordings, photos, and videos as evidence. And finally, Art Bell was able to convince Mel to return to the show with the evidence. Unfortunately, this never happened. After this episode, Mel Waters is never heard from again. So now, let's look at what makes the story of Mel's Hole so great and such an enduring mystery that people seem to be drawn to it over and over again. Number 1, the seed of truth. The story of Mel's Hole taps into a version of what we call the uncanny valley by taking things that we know to be real, placing them in a setting that we can relate to, and even identifying with and making them just a little odd. There is then this slow build into the situation not being normal, and having elements that appear to be unexplainable or otherworldly, allowing the audience to begin to set aside what they know to be reality in favor of the question, what if, and wondering, where is this story leading me? Number 2, the anatomy of fear. The question of what if allows for the unknown and feeds our inner desire and fear that the world is bigger and far more complex than we think, and that we simply don't understand our reality as well as we think we do. This allows reality to be slowly twisted by the storyteller, not through outright shock value, but incrementally, through one strange discovery at a time. The storyteller takes the audience with them as they make their discoveries, allowing the listener to feel as though they are there with those involved and seeing each new twist in the story just as those who are involved make these discoveries, and wondering along with them, what's next? Number 3, crafting a compelling narrative. In the story of Mel's Hole, there is a sense of ambiguity. Although the audience is given details, the details are lacking just enough to fuel the imagination and leave room for open-ended discussions about the subject, ensuring that the story is never really one that is cut and dry. The story has no real origin and no real conclusion. Rather, the listener is left with the ability to make their own conclusions. Mel is never able to clarify where the holes originated from. Instead, they were simply always there. You have no idea who lined the first one with stone or lined the second one with steel. Was it a lost race? Maybe it was aliens. Maybe the holes lead to the hollow earth. Maybe they were portals to another dimension. This is never made clear, and it adds to the mystery and endurance of the story to be told and retold over and over again. The same is true with the conclusion of the story because there isn't one. The audience is left waiting for more but never gets that closure. Rather, they are allowed to have the opportunity to jump to their own conclusions that are both right and wrong simultaneously, because no one has ever presented evidence otherwise. Number 4, the future of fear. The story of Mel's Hole taps into the collective unconsciousness of people around the world by expounding on shared fears and anxieties that we all have about the unknown. Are we alone in the universe, or are there other beings or dimensions that exist along with us, and even are monsters real? We're left wondering what Mel's Hole is and where does this bottomless pit lead. For some, it plays on religious fears of hell and the underworld without directly stating so. For others, it's simply the fear of the unknown and the unexplainable. In both cases, it leaves the audience waiting for the other proverbial shoe to drop. It also feeds into the idea that the government knows more than they are telling us about our reality and our universe, and that they will go to whatever lengths to hide the truth from us and silence those that stumble upon the truth. In the end, the story of Mel's Hole covers all the bases of a great urban legend and goes on to knock it out of the park. It has just enough reality to be believable and just enough strangeness to be intriguing, while at times being so over the top that it makes the listener feel secretly a little foolish for even contemplating its validity in the first place. But it has one more quality, the one where it pulls you back over and over again, needing to either prove it or disprove it. That last part, that's up to you. You decide. So, what do you think about the story of Mel's Hole? Is it true? Is it a hoax? Or is it something else? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time. Good night.